Private Emily Carter had always known that joining the Army would change her life, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of stepping onto Afghan soil. At 21, freshly trained but green, she felt the weight of the desert sun beating down on her uniform, the sand creeping uncomfortably into every seam. The air smelled of dust, metal, and distant gunfire, a stark contrast to the rolling, green hills of her hometown in Ohio. Her heart thumped with a mix of excitement and anxiety. This was the world she had dreamed about, yet now that she was here, the enormity of it all pressed down on her like the heat. She adjusted her helmet and scanned the horizon. The mountains in the distance loomed like silent sentinels, jagged and unyielding, their shadows stretching long over the narrow roads below. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and tangible, almost a living presence. Every movement around her, the shuffle of boots, the creak of armored vehicles, the low hum of distant engines, reminded her that she was now part of something larger, a network of soldiers operating in a delicate, dangerous balance. Emily had been the youngest recruit in her training unit, often struggling to match the experience and confidence of her older classmates. She remembered the looks they had given her when she stumbled over a drill or hesitated under fire simulations. Pity, skepticism, and sometimes quiet amusement. But she had a quiet determination they didn't see, a steady focus that grew stronger under pressure. She had spent hours memorizing maps, learning vehicle layouts, and rehearsing emergency protocols until they became instinct. Those nights had been lonely, the kind of quiet where doubt can creep in, but she had learned to channel that nervous energy into preparation. As she walked toward the forward operating base, Emily's platoon fell in step around her. Most of the soldiers were seasoned, hardened by months, sometimes years, in the field. Sergeant Collins, a man whose reputation for discipline was legendary, gave her a nod. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't dismissive either. Emily took it as a small victory. The others, a mix of veterans and younger soldiers, shot her sideways glances, some curious, some doubtful. They knew she was new, a rookie, and that label followed her like a shadow. She hated it, not because she wanted praise, but because she needed them to see her as capable, not inexperienced. The first day passed in a haze of briefings, weapons checks, and the never-ending hum of activity that defined life on a base at the edge of conflict. Emily quickly realized that the training she had received in Ohio could only teach so much. Nothing had prepared her for the raw sensory overload of a war zone. The constant clatter of gunfire in the distance, the low rhythmic roar of helicopters overhead, and the tension in every glance exchanged among soldiers created an almost unbearable pressure. She found herself clenching her fists and taking deep breaths to stay grounded, focusing on the tasks at hand rather than the fear that tried to creep in at every moment. Lunch in the mess hall was quiet. Emily sat at the far end of a long table, scanning the room. Soldiers laughed and shared stories of missions past, some embellishing events, others speaking in grim tones about the dangers that awaited them in the mountains and valleys beyond. She listened, absorbing everything. There was a story about a convoy ambushed last week, men pinned down for hours before support arrived. Emily's stomach tightened. She had studied ambush scenarios in training, had run drills on reaction, but seeing the fear and tension in the veterans' eyes brought it home in a way that no simulation ever could. After the meal, she joined her platoon for a routine patrol around the perimeter of the base. The walls of the compound were reinforced, sandbags stacked high, lookout towers manned with vigilant soldiers. Even here, every sound carried potential threat. Emily moved in formation, rifle at the ready, scanning constantly. Sergeant Collins barked instructions. Eyes up. Check the corners. Don't assume silence is safety. And Emily absorbed every word. She was a student in a class where the lessons were taught by life and death. As the patrol continued, Emily's mind wandered briefly to her family back home. Her mother's warm kitchen, her father's advice on perseverance, her little brother's wide-eyed admiration, all memories that now seemed distant and fragile. She promised herself she would survive, not just for her own sake, but for them. That thought anchored her when the desert wind kicked up, carrying grit into her eyes, making the world a blur of brown and gold. She wiped it away, adjusted her visor, and pressed on. That evening, Emily returned to the base fatigued but unbroken. She washed the dust from her hands, ate a small dinner, and sat quietly in her tent. Around her, the base hummed with life. Soldiers writing letters, checking weapons, sharing quiet jokes to relieve stress. Emily allowed herself a small smile, a recognition that she had made it through her first day intact. But sleep came fitfully. Her mind replayed every drill, every conversation, every shadow she had seen on the patrol. She knew instinct, training, and courage would soon be tested in ways that no simulation could replicate. By the end of the first week, the subtle shift began. Soldiers who had once dismissed her as just a rookie started to notice her attentiveness. She caught details others missed: a loose bolt on a vehicle, a shift in enemy patrol patterns, a slight change in the wind direction that hinted at movement beyond the perimeter. Sergeant Collins began asking her opinion during briefings, and though her voice trembled the first few times, she quickly found the confidence to speak. Emily wasn't just following orders anymore. She was contributing. The young private still felt fear, but it was no longer paralyzing. Instead, it fueled her, sharpened her senses, and reminded her that vigilance could mean life or death. She had entered Afghanistan as a novice, unsure of her place, her label of rookie weighing heavily on her shoulders. But by the end of that week, she realized that every observation, every action, and every decision mattered, and that one day, when the right moment came, she might be the one who had to step up and make a difference. As the sun dipped below the mountains, casting long shadows across the base, Emily looked out over the perimeter. She drew a deep breath of dusty air, letting it fill her lungs. Somewhere beyond those walls, danger waited. But so did her courage. She was young, inexperienced, and yes, a rookie. But she was ready, and the desert had just begun to test her resolve. Emily Carter had survived her first week, but survival alone would not earn her the respect of her platoon. The label of rookie still clung to her like a shadow. Every glance from a veteran soldier reminded her of her inexperience, and every whispered joke, "Watch the newbie trip over her own boots," stung more than she cared to admit. She could have been bitter, resentful, or overwhelmed by the weight of expectation. Instead, she chose a path that few rookies mastered. She resolved to be better than anyone expected. Her mornings began before sunrise, long before the first roll call. While others slept, she reviewed maps and mission briefs, memorizing every detail about patrol routes, supply schedules, and enemy activity patterns. Her training had given her knowledge, but now she had to convert that into practical skill. She checked and rechecked her weapon, the rifle's metal cold and reassuring in her hands. Every bolt, every sight adjustment, every chamber click, she practiced until muscle memory made it instinct. By the time her platoon rolled out for drills, she moved with a precision that made the veterans blink in surprise. Yet it wasn't just the weapons or the maps that set her apart. It was her attentiveness to the smallest details. During a convoy drill, she noticed that one of the vehicles had a tire slightly underinflated. A small detail, almost invisible to the casual observer, but enough to compromise the mission if ignored. Emily quietly reported it to Sergeant Collins, who inspected it and gave a curt nod. The convoy proceeded safely. The veterans murmured among themselves. The rookie had seen what they had missed. At first, they chalked it up to luck, but it became harder to ignore as the days passed. Emily absorbed information faster than anyone else, always asking questions when she needed clarity, never hesitating to double-check orders. Her notebook, worn and covered in scribbles, became legendary among the platoon. She tracked enemy movements, patrol rotations, and even the habits of locals who passed near the base. Some soldiers teased her for being obsessive. Others quietly acknowledged that her attention to detail could save lives. The hardest part wasn't the work itself. It was breaking through the skepticism. Her platoon had seen many rookies come and go, most overwhelmed by fear or fatigue, fading into the background. Emily had to prove she was different. During mealtime, when others exchanged stories and joked to relieve stress, she listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, it was measured, informed, and precise. Soon, a quiet respect began to emerge, subtle at first, but noticeable. Sergeant Collins started to assign her small leadership tasks, coordinating a watch schedule, checking gear before patrols, relaying messages during training exercises. One night, the opportunity to demonstrate her worth arrived unexpectedly. The base had been quiet for hours, the desert wind carrying only the soft hum of distant vehicles and the occasional flap of canvas tents. Emily volunteered to take the first round of perimeter watch, knowing that most of the platoon preferred the safety of the barracks. She climbed into the lookout tower, binoculars in hand, listening to the subtle sounds of the desert night. Hours passed with nothing but the occasional coyote howl and distant vehicle engine. Yet she remained vigilant, scanning the horizon, aware that even a moment's lapse could have consequences. Then she noticed it, a glint of metal among the rocks along the valley ridge, barely visible in the moonlight. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself to breathe steadily. She took careful aim with her binoculars and confirmed her suspicion. Movement, slow and deliberate, suggesting an enemy scout or insurgent patrol. She immediately alerted the sergeant, who deployed a small reconnaissance team. The patrol confirmed her observation. A potential threat had been detected before it could escalate. Emily's vigilance had prevented what might have been a dangerous encounter. That night, whispers around the base shifted from derision to admiration. The rookie had saved lives with nothing more than her sharp eyes and quick thinking. Emily's transformation was not without struggle. Long hours, harsh conditions, and constant stress tested her resolve. She battled fatigue, dehydration, and a creeping anxiety that threatened to undermine her confidence. But she faced each challenge head-on, often staying up late into the night reviewing plans, memorizing terrain, and learning the personalities of her fellow soldiers. She had discovered that trust wasn't given. It had to be earned through consistent action. Every small success built upon the last, slowly chipping away at the doubts her platoon held. Her relationships with the veterans evolved as well. Private Jackson, a sarcastic yet skilled marksman, began teasing her less and asking for her opinions during drills. Corporal Nguyen, a quiet soldier known for his skepticism, started including her in tactical discussions. Even Sergeant Collins, usually stoic and reserved, nodded approvingly when Emily's insights improved the efficiency and safety of a mission. Slowly, she was no longer just the rookie. She was a valued member of the team, someone whose observations and initiative could tip the balance between success and disaster. By the end of her first month, Emily had begun to earn a reputation as someone calm under pressure, detail-oriented, and relentlessly committed. She had not only survived, but thrived, turning her inexperience into a form of meticulous preparation. Her journal, once filled with nervous notes and reminders, had evolved into a record of observations, insights, and strategies. Every entry reflected her growing understanding of the war zone and her place within it. Even so, Emily remained humble. She knew that respect could be fleeting in a combat environment where every day carried new threats. One day, she might be the hero. The next day, a split-second error could mean disaster. She clung to discipline, training, and awareness as her shields, understanding that courage alone was not enough. And though she still faced subtle skepticism from some corners of the platoon, she had planted seeds of trust and respect, seeds that would soon blossom under far greater trials. Emily's journey as a rookie was far from over. The base, with its harsh routines and ever-present dangers, was only the beginning of what she would face. But she had proven something vital. Preparation, attention, and composure could command respect even in the most skeptical company. And as she looked out over the desert at sunset, watching the rugged landscape stretch endlessly into the horizon, she realized that her first real test, the one that would define her in the eyes of her platoon, was yet to come. She had started as the rookie, nervous and uncertain, but she was becoming something more. A soldier who could be counted on, someone whose actions mattered, someone whose courage would not be questioned when the next crisis struck. And Emily Carter knew, deep down, that the next mission might be the moment when all her preparation would be tested, and she would have to rise, not just to survive, but to save the lives of those around her. The sun had barely risen when the order came down from headquarters: escort a medical convoy through a narrow, treacherous mountain pass. Emily Carter felt a familiar tightness in her chest. The valley they were about to enter had a notorious reputation, a choke point favored by insurgents for ambushes. Every soldier in the platoon knew the statistics, the stories, the warnings. Yet despite the risk, the mission had to be completed. Lives depended on it. Supplies, medicine, reinforcements, none could wait. Emily checked her gear again, adjusting her helmet and tightening her gloves. Her rifle felt heavier than usual, but its weight grounded her. The convoy consisted of 3 armored trucks and a lead Humvee, flanked by 2 smaller vehicles on either side. Emily rode in the second truck, responsible for communications and situational awareness. She observed the lead vehicle as it rumbled ahead, scanning the ridges with trained eyes. The narrow road wound like a snake through cliffs on both sides. Every shadow, every ridge, every boulder could conceal a threat. Emily felt a prickling in her spine, that instinctive sense of unease that had already saved lives once. She ignored it for now, reminding herself that anticipation and caution were different from fear. The platoon commander, Sergeant Collins, briefed the convoy one last time. Stay alert. Eyes and ears open. We move, we cover, we communicate. Watch for traps. Don't assume silence is safety. His words were sharp, but there was no panic in his tone. Emily's hands tightened on the Kun's unit, fingers brushing over buttons she had memorized until the sequences were second nature. She could hear the faint hum of engines, the occasional squeak of suspension, the crunch of gravel beneath tires. The desert air was dry and heavy, carrying a sense of expectancy, like the calm before a storm. As the convoy advanced into the valley, Emily's mind flicked between her training and her instincts. She noted unusual tire marks on the road, evidence of prior movement. Tracks ran along the cliffs above, suggesting someone had positioned themselves on high ground. She leaned closer to the radio to report, but her fingers froze when she realized the main channel was dead. She tried switching frequencies, scanning rapidly, but every attempt met only static. The interference felt deliberate, and the quiet of the valley suddenly seemed oppressive. Emily's gaze shifted to the surrounding terrain. The cliffs were steep and jagged, with jagged rocks jutting like teeth. Small shadows moved subtly across the ridges, almost imperceptible in the rising sun. She squinted, trying to determine whether it was just the wind-shifting dust or something more sinister. Her training urged caution, but experience was still sparse. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, she thought briefly. But instinct, that deep, unshakable sense, honed in weeks of rigorous patrols, screamed otherwise. She whispered to herself, "Stay alert. Something's here, The convoy continued, tension rising with every mile. Soldiers exchanged occasional quiet words, laughter forced to disguise unease. Emily noticed how their eyes kept darting to the ridges, hands twitching near holsters and rifle grips. The narrowness of the road meant there was nowhere to escape if an attack came. Emily adjusted her binoculars, scanning every rock and crevice. Then she saw it, a glint of metal on the cliffside, subtle and reflective. It could have been anything, a rock, a shard of metal, debris. But her instincts refused to let her dismiss it. Her heartbeat accelerated. Emily leaned toward Sergeant Collins and tried to speak. Before she could warn him, there was a flicker, the first sign of movement, deliberate and coordinated. The lead truck jolted slightly, but the driver assumed it was rough terrain. Emily's mind raced. Her fingers hovered over the radio's emergency signal. If this was an ambush, she had to act quickly. Every second mattered. She tried to maintain a calm exterior, while adrenaline surged through her veins. Then, without warning, the valley erupted. A deafening explosion ripped through the lead vehicle. An improvised explosive device had detonated beneath the wheels. Smoke and fire consumed the truck instantly, and the force threw debris across the road. Bullets began to rain from the cliffs, striking metal, rock, and sand with deafening clatters. Soldiers ducked instinctively, shouting commands that were nearly lost in the chaos. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to breathe methodically, scanning the ridge and evaluating the enemy positions. She saw insurgents taking positions along both sides of the cliff, using rocks and outcroppings for cover. They fired with precision, pinning the remaining vehicles in place. Soldiers in the convoy were trapped, vulnerable. Emily's training kicked in, but this was no simulation. The threat was real, and every decision could mean life or death. She remembered drills on how to react during an ambush. Find cover, assess the enemy, communicate, and wait for reinforcements. But she also knew that the radio had failed. Without communication, they were blind. The medic, who had been seated near the middle of the convoy, was injured by debris. Emily's stomach twisted at the sight, but she didn't allow panic to take over. Instead, she crawled through the dust and debris toward the backup radio unit, ignoring bullets whizzing past her. Her hands were scraped and bloodied from contact with metal and rock, but she forced herself to focus. The comms needed to work. Reinforcements needed to know their exact location. Lives depended on her now. Emily tore open the radio pack and began the delicate work of reconnecting the wires manually. Sparks flew, and her hands shook with both adrenaline and fatigue. She glanced up at the insurgents on the ridges, noting their positions and the way they moved, suppressing a gasp at how methodically they had set the trap. Every second mattered. The training she had internalized became instinct, her mind moving through scenarios at lightning speed. Finally, a crackle of sound emerged from the radio, a fragile, imperfect line of communication. Convoy under fire. Coordinates 32 reinforcements needed immediately. She shouted, projecting her voice over the chaos. Her message was shaky, but clear. Moments later, she saw helicopters appearing in the distance, air support responding. Bullets continued to strike, but Emily moved with precision, taking cover, observing the enemy, and preparing to fire if necessary. Her quick thinking allowed the pinned soldiers to reposition behind cover. She directed them with concise commands, noting the safest paths and opportunities to escape the kill zone. The convoy began moving again, cautiously and strategically, guided by her calm in the storm. Emily's transformation from the rookie of just a few weeks ago was complete in that moment. She was no longer an observer, no longer a follower. She had become a leader, even if unofficially, driven by instinct, knowledge, and courage. The valley, once an ordinary route for a convoy, had become a theater of survival. Emily's eyes never left the ridges, analyzing movement, calculating angles, predicting enemy strategies. The sound of engines, bullets, and explosions blended into a rhythm she could navigate. Every command, every calculated movement, every burst of fire was a step toward survival. And though fear remained, it no longer controlled her. Fear became fuel, sharpening her awareness, heightening her senses, and compelling her to act decisively. By the time the first helicopters arrived to support the convoy, Emily had already positioned her team in the safest zones available, neutralizing some of the enemy's advantage. The ambush, meticulously planned and executed, was no match for her quick thinking and steadfast determination. Soldiers who had once doubted her eyes widened in recognition. The rookie was no longer merely learning. She was protecting lives, saving comrades, and standing firm when every instinct screamed to flee. As the helicopter's shadows grew over the valley floor, Emily allowed herself a brief, measured breath. The convoy was not yet safe, but they had a fighting chance. Every life still mattered, every decision still counted, and the mission was not complete. But in that chaos, she discovered a truth about herself. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. And Emily Carter, the rookie who had stepped into Afghanistan just weeks ago, had found her courage in the most intense crucible she could imagine. The convoy had entered the narrowest stretch of the valley, a natural funnel of rock and dirt, where cliffs loomed overhead like silent sentinels. Emily Carter's pulse quickened. She had memorized every detail of this terrain, studied maps, and imagined ambush scenarios in countless drills, yet nothing could replicate the tangible weight of the desert around her. Every sound seemed amplified, the crunch of gravel beneath tires, the whisper of wind against jagged rocks, the distant call of a hawk circling above. The valley, quiet yet threatening, held its breath, and so did Emily. Her instincts sharpened as she scanned the cliffs on either side. The rising sun cast shadows that twisted across the rugged slopes, creating illusions of movement. She strained her eyes through binoculars, looking for any irregularity, a glint of metal, a silhouette, a ripple of dust, anything that could signal enemy presence. She noticed fresh tire marks on the road edges, winding unnaturally, like someone had prepared the path specifically for this convoy. Her stomach tightened. This wasn't coincidence. Something was waiting for them. Emily reached for the radio to alert Sergeant Collins, but static filled her ears. She switched frequencies, adjusted knobs, tried backup channels, nothing. The radio crackled, hissed, then fell silent. A chill ran down her spine. Communication was dead. She glanced at the lead truck, noting the tense posture of the driver and the squad in front. They hadn't noticed her observations yet. The convoy pressed forward, oblivious to the danger, while Emily's heart pounded in urgent rhythm. She leaned closer to Collins, trying to catch his attention. "Sir, there's—" She was cut off by a faint vibration in the ground. Emily froze. A subtle, almost imperceptible thrum ran beneath the convoy wheels. Her hand tightened on the radio. The sound matched nothing she had trained for. It wasn't natural. She glanced at the road ahead, noting the arrangement of rocks and the slight unevenness of the surface. Her mind raced. This was a classic setup for an improvised explosive device, carefully concealed and timed. The vehicle engines hummed steadily, unaware of the trap that had been laid before them. Emily's eyes darted back to the cliffs, where shadows seemed to shift more deliberately now. She noticed a subtle motion, a figure crouched behind a boulder, barely distinguishable from the rock, adjusting something that gleamed faintly in the sun. She blinked, convinced she had imagined it. But when she looked again, the figure remained, low and deliberate, with another shadow flitting across a ridge further down. Her training screamed, this wasn't random movement. The valley had been staged for an ambush. Her pulse thundered, yet Emily forced herself to remain calm. Panic could be fatal here. She scanned every ridge, every ledge, every crevice. Tiny movements, a hand adjusting a weapon, a glint of metal, confirmed what she had feared. Insurgents were positioned above and ahead, waiting for the convoy to enter the kill zone fully. Emily's stomach clenched, but she pushed down fear and focused on the next steps. The safety of her team depended on her composure. Emily's mind raced through options. The radio was dead. Reinforcements were unreachable. The lead vehicle would reach the narrowest point of the valley in moments, with no cover, no escape. She had to act immediately. She whispered to herself, repeating drills she had run countless times. Find cover, assess, communicate, wait for opportunity. But there was no communication. No one else could know the danger. She was on her own. She took a deep breath and scanned the immediate surroundings. Rocks at the side of the road offered limited protection. Boulders could serve as temporary cover, and the terrain offered slight elevation advantages if approached cautiously. Emily began calculating trajectories, angles, distances. Every detail mattered: where the enemy might fire from, how the convoy could respond, how much time she had. Her training had drilled this into her, yet reality moved faster than rehearsed drills. She needed to trust her instincts honed by hours of vigilance and tiny victories she had earned as a rookie. Then she noticed subtle changes in the air: the shift of dust, the snap of pebbles moving under unseen feet, a shadow stretching differently, as if someone had stepped into sunlight. The signs were minute, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakable to Emily's trained eyes. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her rifle, not out of fear, but from the surge of adrenaline. She adjusted her position, crouching behind a small rock formation that offered partial concealment while giving her a clear line of sight. Moments passed like hours. Emily's focus sharpened, every sense heightened. She knew the first attack could come any second. Her breathing slowed intentionally, her heartbeat steadied. She observed the insurgents' positioning, memorizing the locations, counting numbers, noting their angles of fire. Her mind cataloged everything: rifle positions, cover spots, escape routes, the timing of movements. Every instinct she had developed since her arrival at the base converged in this moment. Suddenly, a figure shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, and Emily caught it out of the corner of her eye. Her pulse spiked. The first signs of the ambush were unmistakable. She realized that the insurgents had been waiting for the convoy to reach the valley's narrowest section. The explosives were planted along the road. Riflemen were positioned along the ridges. And her platoon had no warning. Emily's stomach churned, but there was no time to hesitate. She had to act. Emily crouched low, whispering instructions to herself, planning her next move. She considered how to warn the lead vehicle, how to mitigate the threat, how to protect the convoy with the tools available to her. She thought back to her drills, to the first moments of her training, to every observation that had saved a life. One thing was clear: waiting would cost them dearly. She needed to move, communicate, and neutralize the threat, all simultaneously. She scanned the cliffs one last time. Dust rose faintly near a boulder to the left, suggesting another insurgent in hiding. Her jaw tightened. The signs were everywhere now. She was no longer just a rookie observing. She was a strategist, forced into real combat assessment without the luxury of trial and error. Every second counted. She had to act quickly, or the convoy would be caught completely unprepared. Emily shifted her weight slightly, preparing to move toward the comms unit in the back of her truck. She had a plan: re-establish communication, assess enemy positions from a higher vantage point, and provide covering fire if necessary. The adrenaline surged through her veins, steadying her nerves, focusing her mind. Every detail mattered: the angle of fire, the timing of movement, the reaction of each soldier in the convoy. Emily knew she had become the key to survival. The first signs of trouble had fully arrived. The valley had revealed its deadly secret, and Emily Carter stood ready, her mind sharp, her instincts razor-edged. The ambush was imminent. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down, yet she did not waver. Her preparation, discipline, and courage would be tested in ways she could not yet imagine. The rookie who had arrived weeks ago was no longer merely learning. She was about to lead. The valley had remained deceptively silent for only a heartbeat longer. Then it erupted. A deafening explosion shook the ground as the lead truck hit an improvised explosive device hidden beneath the dusty road. Metal twisted, glass shattered, and a fireball consumed the vehicle instantly. Emily Carter's body slammed against the seat of her truck from the shockwave, sand and debris raining down around her. Smoke filled the air, acrid and thick, burning her eyes and throat. Panic rippled through the convoy as soldiers scrambled to find cover, weapons drawn, instincts screaming at them to survive. Emily didn't freeze. Years of training had drilled a response into her bones, and instinct took over where fear tried to seize control. She ducked behind a toppled crate for partial cover, the smell of gunpowder mixing with the desert dust. Bullets struck the rocks around her with sharp, metallic cracks. Her heart pounded like a war drum, but her mind moved faster than the chaos. She had to act quickly, or lives would be lost. The radio, her lifeline, had failed moments earlier. Communication with command was severed. She was alone, and the convoy depended on her now. Her eyes scanned the cliffs above. Figures emerged from shadowed rocks, rifle barrels glinting in the rising sun. The insurgents had been waiting for this exact moment, positioning themselves in perfect tactical advantage. They were methodical, disciplined, deadly. Emily's stomach clenched, but she forced herself to focus. Fear was a tool, not a master. Every movement, every calculation, every decision mattered. She had been trained for chaos, and this was the purest form of it. The medic, seated in the middle truck, had been thrown across the floor by the blast and was now unconscious, a pool of blood forming near his head. Emily's stomach twisted, but she forced herself to remain calm. She crawled low beneath the steel frame of her vehicle, ignoring the bullets whistling past, and reached for the backup communications kit stashed in the corner. Her hands were scraped and bleeding from contact with jagged metal and debris, but she did not falter. The comms unit had to work. Lives depended on it. Emily tore open the radio case, checking every wire and connection. Sparks flew as she worked, but she persisted, refusing to let panic dictate her actions. Sweat stung her eyes, but she blinked it away and continued. She needed to send coordinates, alert command, and request air support. One wrong connection, one hesitation, and the convoy would be trapped in the kill zone. The hum of helicopters in the distance might not arrive in time. She had to buy her team minutes, precious minutes that could make the difference between life and death. Bullets struck the truck again, rattling the steel and sending shards of dust into the air. Emily adjusted her position, crouching lower, her rifle raised. She scanned the ridges, calculating angles of fire, noting the enemy positions and memorizing their numbers. Each insurgent was partially exposed, relying on cover that could be suppressed. Emily took a deep breath, bracing herself against the vehicle's frame. This was no longer a drill. Every move would have consequences. Every decision could save or cost a life. A burst of automatic fire erupted from the ridge, forcing her to dive behind a larger rock for cover. Emily's instincts were razor-sharp. She observed the enemy's muzzle flashes and predicted their arcs. With deliberate precision, she returned fire, suppressing their attack long enough for her team to reposition behind safer cover. She called out concise directions to the soldiers in her truck, who were struggling to regain composure. Her voice, calm yet commanding, cut through the chaos, guiding them like a beacon. For the first time, they weren't just following orders, they were following her. The insurgents, realizing the convoy wasn't going down quietly, adjusted their positions. Emily noted the shift immediately and recalculated her own movements. She crawled low along the edge of the truck, using boulders for temporary cover, firing controlled bursts at enemy positions to keep them suppressed. Her training on ambush responses, situational awareness, and rapid-fire protocols came alive in a terrifyingly real way. She could feel her heart hammering, but her mind was clear, focused on the task: protect her comrades, survive, and hold the line until support arrived. The convoy was pinned, but slowly moving as Emily's actions created opportunities for them to advance. She observed a slight break in enemy fire, a ridge where one insurgent had exposed himself. With steady hands, she fired a controlled burst, forcing him to retreat into cover. Minutes, but it felt like hours, passed in this relentless cycle of observation, firing, and repositioning. Each movement was deliberate, each shot calculated. She was no longer a rookie reacting to fear. She was a soldier leading by instinct and courage. Suddenly, she heard a faint hum in the distance, the first signs of reinforcements. Air support was approaching. Emily's heart lifted slightly, but she didn't allow herself relief. The ambush was far from over. She continued to direct her team, covering their repositioning, checking the wounded, and maintaining the only lifeline the convoy had. Every soldier began to respond to her call under fire, trusting her instincts, following her lead. The rookie was now the anchor in a storm of chaos. Minutes later, the distant roar of helicopters grew louder, breaking through the din of gunfire. Emily's quick thinking and decisive action had stabilized the convoy long enough for the reinforcements to approach. The insurgents, realizing their ambush was compromised, began to retreat along the ridges. Emily remained vigilant, covering their withdrawal, noting positions, and ensuring no further attacks could surprise the convoy. She had bought them not just minutes, but safety. As smoke cleared and the first waves of air support arrived, Emily surveyed the aftermath. The lead truck had been destroyed, debris littering the valley floor. 2 soldiers were wounded, but alive, stabilized by medics. Several insurgents had retreated or been neutralized. Her hands shook slightly from adrenaline, her uniform streaked with dust and blood, but she allowed herself a small, exhausted smile. She had done what seemed impossible for a rookie. She had saved lives. She had turned chaos into survival. The soldiers who had once doubted her eyes now regarded her with awe. Sergeant Collins approached, a hand gripping her shoulder firmly. "Carter," he said, voice steady. "That's how a soldier acts in the field. You saved them today." Emily nodded, exhausted but silent, letting the weight of the moment settle over her. She didn't seek praise. She had acted because she had no choice, because every instinct screamed that hesitation would cost lives. Yet in that recognition, she realized she had earned something far more valuable than commendation: the trust of her platoon. As the convoy regrouped and continued through the valley under air cover, Emily took a moment to process everything. Her heart still raced, but her mind was clear. She had survived the ambush, protected her team, and begun to understand the true meaning of courage in combat. The rookie who had arrived weeks ago, nervous and inexperienced, had been forged by fire and pressure into a soldier capable of leading under extreme duress. And though the danger was far from over, Emily Carter had discovered a truth she would carry for the rest of her life. Courage, preparation, and composure could save lives, even when everything seemed lost. The valley was chaos incarnate. Smoke from the destroyed lead truck hung thick in the air, mingling with dust kicked up by the convoy's trembling wheels. Bullets rattled against rocks, ricocheting unpredictably. Soldiers screamed orders that were almost lost in the din. Emily Carter pressed herself behind a jagged boulder, adrenaline coursing through her veins like wildfire. Every instinct she had honed over the past weeks screamed at her to act. She couldn't rely on the radio. It had failed earlier. No reinforcements could reach them yet. Her platoon depended entirely on her vigilance, her strategy, her courage. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for the backup communications kit tucked in the corner of her truck. Sparks danced across the wires as she worked to reconnect the broken lines. Dust stung her eyes, but she ignored it, focusing solely on the task at hand. Minutes, or perhaps seconds, felt like hours. She could hear the enemy moving along the ridges, adjusting their positions, preparing to finish what their ambush had started. Emily's breath came in controlled bursts, her mind calculating trajectories, cover points, and escape routes. With the radio finally sputtering to life, she spoke with clarity born of desperation. Convoy under fire. Coordinates 3,235 reinforcements needed immediately. The reply crackled faintly through the static. Hold position. Air support en route. Maintain cover. Relief surged, but there was no time to celebrate. The insurgents had the advantage of high ground, an element of surprise. Emily knew the convoy was still dangerously exposed. Every second of delay could cost lives. She glanced around. Several soldiers were pinned behind overturned crates and vehicle debris, struggling to remain calm. One young private's hands trembled around his rifle. Emily leaned out from her cover and called sharply, "Move to the rock on your left. Cover your teammate. Watch the ridge." Her voice carried over the chaos, precise and commanding. The squad, hearing her decisiveness, followed. The panic that had gripped them began to abate, replaced by the trust that she inspired. For the first time, Emily was no longer merely a follower. She was a leader in the heat of battle. Emily surveyed the enemy's positions with careful scrutiny. Rifle barrels glinted intermittently from boulders and ledges. Movement along the ridge indicated at least 8 insurgents actively engaging the convoy. Each had partial cover. Each relied on the element of surprise. She noted the angles of their fire, the distances between them, and the paths that her team could safely take. Her mind ran like a machine, calculating probabilities and sequencing actions in rapid succession. The soldiers behind her obeyed each instruction without question, their survival dependent on her clarity under fire. Crouched low, she fired controlled bursts at exposed enemy positions, keeping them suppressed while her team maneuvered to safer locations. Every shot was deliberate. She adjusted her aim constantly, noting the enemy's reactions. She could hear the shouts of her comrades, feel the tremor of the ground beneath, smell the acrid smoke from burning tires and metal. The roar of the ambush was deafening, but Emily remained calm, her focus absolute. She realized that the only way out of this valley alive was through coordinated, precise action, led by someone who could maintain clarity amidst the chaos. The medic, wounded but still conscious, needed immediate attention. Emily ordered 2 soldiers to assist him while providing covering fire. Bullets whizzed past as they lifted him to a safer position behind a larger boulder. Emily's eyes never left the ridge. She identified an insurgent, moving to flank the convoy, and raised her rifle, firing a suppressive shot that forced him to retreat behind cover. The tactical advantage began to shift slightly. By controlling key points of enemy exposure, she created opportunities for her platoon to move incrementally toward safety. Every moment demanded multitasking, observation, firing, coordination, and communication with the struggling soldiers. Emily barked concise instructions. Private Diaz, move left. Cover your sector. Jenkins, provide suppressive fire on that ridge. Her voice, calm and authoritative, cut through the roar of explosions and gunfire. The soldiers obeyed, inspired by her composure. The rookie who had arrived weeks ago, timid and uncertain, now orchestrated movements like a seasoned commander. Suddenly, a sniper's shot ricocheted dangerously close to Emily's head. She ducked instinctively, recalculating the next steps. The insurgents were adapting to her maneuvers, but she had anticipated this. She adjusted her team's formation, ensuring overlapping fields of fire and maximum cover. Her mind worked frantically, matching speed with precision, considering every possibility, angles, trajectories, timing, and risk. She realized that the ambush was evolving in real time, but so was she. She had to stay one step ahead to protect everyone in the convoy. Minutes dragged on like hours. Emily's focus was relentless. The soldiers began to gain confidence, moving more smoothly, taking cover efficiently, responding instantly to her commands. She continued to fire from her position, suppressing enemy shooters just long enough for her platoon to advance incrementally. She had become the linchpin in the chaos, the keystone holding the group together under an overwhelming assault. Without her, the ambush could have decimated them. Then came the sound she had been waiting for, the distant thrum of helicopter blades cutting through the smoky air. Reinforcements were arriving. Emily allowed herself a brief, controlled smile, but did not relax. The insurgents were still active, and every second remained critical. She continued to coordinate the soldiers' movements, marking safe paths, identifying targets for suppression, and directing covering fire. The rookies and veterans alike followed her guidance, each action now part of a synchronized effort that she had orchestrated under fire. As the helicopters neared, Emily instructed her team to maintain positions until they were secured. Enemy fire grew sporadic as insurgents recognized the arrival of support, attempting to withdraw. Emily covered their retreat, ensuring that the platoon remained cohesive and unharmed. Her quick decision-making, composure, and tactical awareness had not only saved lives, but allowed the convoy to survive an ambush that could have been catastrophic. She had turned imminent disaster into a controlled evacuation. Finally, with the convoy stabilized and air support fully engaged, Emily allowed herself a moment to breathe. Her hands were scraped, her uniform dust-streaked and bloodied, her heart still racing. Yet she felt an overwhelming sense of clarity and accomplishment. She had not merely survived, she had led. She had coordinated, protected, and inspired her platoon. The rookie who had entered Afghanistan weeks ago, uncertain and nervous, had transformed into a soldier capable of decisive leadership under the most extreme circumstances. Sergeant Collins approached, a mixture of pride and astonishment on his face. "Carter," he said, voice steady despite the chaos. "You just kept everyone alive. That's how a soldier leads under fire." "Exceptional work." Emily nodded, too exhausted for words. She had not acted for praise. She had acted out of instinct, training, and the sheer will to survive and protect her team. And in that moment, she realized that the battlefield had tested her in ways no simulation ever could, and she had passed. Emily remained on her knees behind the boulder, scanning the ridges for any remaining threats, her eyes sharp, mind alert, heart still pounding. The convoy was not yet entirely safe, but the worst had passed. She had established order in chaos, provided critical leadership when none existed, and ensured the survival of the men and women who now relied on her instincts and courage. The transformation from rookie to reliable combat leader had been sudden, brutal, and irreversible. As the convoy finally began to move safely under the protection of helicopters and supporting fire, Emily allowed herself a moment to reflect. She had faced terror, uncertainty, and the full force of a coordinated ambush. Yet she had acted decisively, efficiently, and with remarkable composure. The soldiers who had once doubted her now regarded her with awe and respect. She had proven not to them, but to herself, that courage, preparation, and quick thinking could turn a desperate situation into survival. The roar of helicopter blades above the valley brought a fragile glimmer of hope, but the danger had not passed. Emily Carter remained crouched behind a jagged boulder, eyes scanning the ridges for any sign of the insurgents who still clung to their positions. Smoke and dust filled the air, mixing with the acrid smell of burning tires and metal. Every second mattered. The convoy had survived the initial ambush, but pockets of enemy fighters remained, poised to strike again. Emily's pulse raced, but her mind was sharp, calculating each move with precision. The insurgents, frustrated by the arrival of air support, began repositioning. Rifle barrels glinted, and small arms fire intermittently chipped at the rocks around the convoy. Emily noted their patterns immediately, which positions offered cover, where they exposed themselves while adjusting weapons, and which routes might allow them to escape or regroup. She had learned to think like the enemy, predicting their actions before they could execute them. Every observation was critical. A single mistake could unravel the fragile survival she had fought so hard to secure. She directed her platoon with concise, authoritative commands. Diaz, move to the left boulder. Jenkins, suppress the ridge on the right. Keep low, move fast, and watch your angles. The soldiers followed instinctively, trusting her judgment. Her calm, precise instructions cut through the chaos, giving structure to the panic that had gripped them moments earlier. Emily's presence had become a beacon of control amid the storm, transforming a desperate defensive into a coordinated offensive effort. The insurgents attempted to flank the convoy from the left ridge, hoping to isolate a few vehicles and create chaos. Emily anticipated this movement, her mind racing through the possibilities. She calculated angles, distances, and timing. Raising her rifle, she delivered suppressive fire that forced the enemy to hesitate and duck behind cover. Her shots were controlled and deliberate, targeting only exposed threats to maximize impact and minimize wasted effort. The insurgents, startled by her precision, faltered, giving the convoy precious seconds to reposition. Emily's next move was audacious. She signaled 2 soldiers to follow her and sprinted toward a small outcropping that offered a higher vantage point. Bullets whizzed past, some striking rocks mere inches from her hands and feet. Sweat and dust stung her eyes, but she pressed on, crawling over jagged rocks with calculated movements. Reaching the higher position, she gained a clear line of sight over the valley floor and the ridges where insurgents had entrenched themselves. From this vantage point, she could coordinate the platoon's fire more effectively and identify the remaining threats. Her voice rose over the chaos, steady and commanding. Hold fire until I mark targets. Jenkins, suppress the ridge above the center. Diaz, cover the left flank. Everyone else, move carefully toward the trucks. The soldiers responded with a renewed sense of purpose. Emily's clear directives gave them confidence, enabling a coordinated counteroffensive. They moved with precision, each action synchronized, each decision informed by her observation and guidance. The tide of the ambush was beginning to turn. The insurgents, now aware that their ambush had failed, attempted a desperate retreat toward a narrow crevice along the cliffside. Emily recognized the opening immediately. She directed her team to cut off their escape routes, positioning themselves strategically to trap the enemy. Her tactical foresight ensured that the insurgents could neither regroup nor flank the convoy again. Each movement was calculated, designed to maximize safety for her platoon while neutralizing the remaining threat. Emily's own rifle fired in controlled bursts, targeting insurgents who exposed themselves while retreating. She remained calm, deliberate, and precise, each shot reinforcing the platoon's momentum. The convoy soldiers, inspired by her courage and clarity, followed her directions without hesitation. The insurgents were gradually overwhelmed, their advantage erased by Emily's combination of observation, strategy, and relentless determination. The rookie who had once been underestimated was now the central figure in turning a near-disastrous ambush into a strategic victory. Minutes passed, each stretched by tension and adrenaline. Bullets cracked, rocks shattered, and the insurgents' movements became more erratic. Emily identified the final pockets of resistance and guided her platoon to eliminate them. With every instruction, she ensured that her team remained protected, that casualties were minimized, and that the ambush collapsed completely. Her leadership had transformed chaos into coordinated action, giving the soldiers structure, purpose, and hope amid the violence. As the last insurgent was neutralized, Emily allowed herself a brief moment to breathe. The valley, once a deadly trap, was now under control. Soldiers began moving carefully to regroup around the surviving vehicles, their faces showing a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and awe. Sergeant Collins approached, his expression one of both pride and disbelief. "Carter," he said, his voice steady despite the smoke and dust, "you just turned a trap into a victory. I've never seen anyone react like that under fire. You saved lives today." Emily nodded silently, the weight of the moment settling over her. She had not sought recognition. She had acted out of necessity, courage, and instinct. She checked her team quickly. Minor injuries, exhaustion, and dust-covered uniforms were the only reminders of the intensity of the ambush. Her gaze shifted to the destroyed lead truck, the charred wreckage a stark reminder of what could have happened. Emily's thoughts briefly flicked to the medic, now stabilized by the soldiers she had guided, alive because she had acted decisively. The reality of combat was harsh, unforgiving, and absolute, yet she had prevailed through courage and leadership. The helicopters landed nearby, providing extraction and medical support. Emily coordinated the handoff efficiently, ensuring that all soldiers were accounted for, injuries treated, and the remaining convoy secured. She continued to scan the valley, observing potential threats, remaining vigilant until command confirmed that the ambush had been fully neutralized. Only then did she allow herself to relax slightly, the adrenaline ebbing slowly, replaced by the profound weight of accomplishment and relief. The soldiers who had once whispered doubts about her now looked at her with admiration and respect. Private Diaz, the young soldier who had trembled at the start of the ambush, approached cautiously. "Carter, you saved us," he said, voice shaking. Emily offered a tired, reassuring smile, placing a hand on his shoulder. She did not seek accolades. The respect and trust she had earned were reward enough. Her actions had proven, in the harshest crucible imaginable, that courage, preparation, and composure could triumph even in the face of overwhelming danger. As the convoy finally moved out of the valley, Emily took a moment to reflect. Weeks ago, she had been the rookie, nervous, and uncertain. She had learned, adapted, and grown under fire, transforming into a leader capable of decisive action in life-and-death situations. Her instincts, honed through relentless observation, training, and determination, had saved lives and preserved the convoy. The ambush had tested her in ways she could never have imagined, and she had risen to the challenge. Emily knew the journey was far from over. The valley was only one mission in a long deployment, and danger could strike again at any moment. Yet she had discovered something vital about herself. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act decisively despite it. Preparation, focus, and leadership could turn the tide even in the most desperate situations. And Emily Carter, the once nervous rookie, had become a soldier capable of transforming chaos into survival. The sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley floor. Emily glanced at the remaining soldiers, their exhaustion mirrored in her own. Yet there was pride, camaraderie, and the unspoken understanding that they had survived something extraordinary. The valley that had seemed like a death trap had become the stage on which Emily Carter had proven her worth, courage, and indomitable spirit. And as they moved toward the safety of the base, she knew that this mission, this moment, would stay with her forever, a testament to what it meant to rise, to lead, and to survive. The convoy finally returned to the base under the fading light of the evening sun. Dust and smoke clung to every uniform, the acrid smell of gunpowder and burned tires lingering in the air. Soldiers moved with exhaustion etched into their features, yet there was an unmistakable sense of relief and camaraderie in their steps. Emily Carter remained behind, scanning the perimeter to ensure no lingering threats remained, her rifle slung loosely across her shoulder. The adrenaline of the ambush had begun to ebb, leaving her muscles sore, her lungs heavy, and her mind buzzing with the enormity of what had just happened. As she walked toward the command tent, Emily noticed how the soldiers now regarded her differently. The whispers and side glances that had marked her as a rookie were gone. Their eyes reflected admiration and trust. Sergeant Collins approached, his expression calm, but filled with pride. "Carter," he said, his voice carrying both relief and respect, "get inside. You need to rest. You've earned it." Emily shook her head, glancing back toward the valley, as if she could still see the insurgents' positions etched into the rocks. She realized that in war, rest was never truly rest. The mind never ceased its vigilance. Inside the command tent, Colonel Harding waited, flanked by senior officers. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had been on base just weeks ago, the rookie struggling to keep up, now standing in the presence of the highest command after surviving and leading a platoon through an ambush that could have been catastrophic. The colonel's gaze swept over her, analyzing her uniform, her posture, the evidence of dust, sweat, and minor scrapes. Then he spoke, his voice steady but commanding. "Carter, I've received reports of your actions in the valley. By all accounts, you took command under fire, coordinated your platoon, and turned a deadly ambush into a successful extraction. This is extraordinary for a soldier of any experience level, let alone a rookie." Emily felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Pride surged, but it was tempered by the memory of those who had been injured, the destruction of the lead truck, and the knowledge of what could have happened if she had faltered. She stood at attention, her body tense but her mind sharp, listening as Colonel Harding continued. "Your initiative, situational awareness, and leadership saved lives today. The platoon followed your guidance precisely because of your composure and decisiveness. You exemplify the courage and skill we train for, and your actions today will not be forgotten." The officers exchanged nods, and Emily realized she was about to receive formal recognition. A medal, a commendation, something tangible to mark her bravery and leadership. She had never sought it, never imagined she would. Her motivation had always been survival and protecting her fellow soldiers, but the weight of acknowledgement pressed upon her in a way that was almost surreal. Colonel Harding reached into a folder and pulled out the commendation, handing it to her with a steady hand. "For extraordinary valor under fire, Sergeant Emily Carter is hereby commended for her courage, leadership, and decisive actions during the convoy ambush in the valley." The room was silent for a moment, each officer respecting the gravity of the occasion. Emily accepted the commendation with a respectful nod, her voice quiet but steady. "Thank you, sir," she said. She felt the eyes of the platoon on her, veterans and rookies alike, witnessing the recognition of someone they had once doubted. She realized that she had not only proven herself in combat, but had earned the trust, respect, and admiration of those she fought alongside. Later, as she walked back to her barracks, Emily reflected on the events of the day. The ambush had tested her in ways she could never have anticipated. The fear she had felt in the valley, the responsibility of guiding her platoon, the split-second decisions under life or death pressure, all of it had forged her into someone new. She had started as a rookie, unsure and underestimated, but she had proven that courage was not about rank or experience. It was about preparation, awareness, and the will to act decisively when it mattered most. Private Diaz approached her cautiously, still shaken from the ambush. "Carter, I don't know what I would have done without you," he admitted, his voice small but sincere. Emily offered a tired smile, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We all did our part," she said quietly. "You followed my lead, and that made all the difference. You were brave too. Remember that." She realized then that leadership was not about taking all the credit. It was about inspiring others to rise above fear and act together. Word of her actions spread quickly through the base. By the next morning, Emily was approached by soldiers, officers, and medics alike, each expressing gratitude, respect, and admiration. For the first time, she felt a sense of belonging, no longer the nervous rookie struggling to keep pace, but a vital part of the team. Her confidence grew, not from accolades, but from the knowledge that she had faced a crucible and emerged capable of guiding others through chaos. That evening, she stood on the balcony of her barracks, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The valley she had navigated, the ambush she had survived, and the lives she had protected played through her mind. The quiet after the storm was profound. Emily realized that combat was more than strategy, tactics, and firepower. It was about courage, composure, trust, and the willingness to act when hesitation could mean death. She had discovered something within herself, resilience, focus, and a leadership that had been waiting to emerge. As she looked at the sky, streaked with the orange and purple hues of dusk, Emily felt a sense of closure. The ambush was over, her platoon was safe, and she had proven her worth in a way that no simulation or training exercise could replicate. The rookie who had once been underestimated was now a soldier recognized for valor, a leader trusted by her comrades, and a survivor of one of the most dangerous encounters she had faced. That night, as the base settled into its uneasy quiet, Emily wrote in her journal. The words were simple but profound. Courage is not the absence of fear. Leadership is not about rank. Survival is about focus, preparation, and acting decisively when it matters most. She closed the journal, knowing that these lessons would stay with her forever, guiding her in future missions, challenges, and battles. The next morning, the platoon gathered for a brief ceremony. Colonel Harding formally presented the commendation in front of the assembled soldiers. Applause echoed across the base as Emily accepted the recognition once more, but this time with a quiet confidence. She had earned it not through ambition or desire for praise, but through action, courage, and leadership under the most extreme circumstances. She was no longer a rookie. She was a soldier, tested and proven, and ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. In the days that followed, Emily's story became part of the base's lore, the rookie who had seen what others overlooked, who had anticipated the ambush, and who had guided her platoon through life and death chaos. Veterans cited her actions as an example of courage and composure, while new recruits found inspiration in her story. Emily, however, remained humble, knowing that every action, every success, and every survival was part of a larger team effort. Yet she could no longer deny the transformation within herself. She had faced fear, chaos, and uncertainty, and she had prevailed. Emily Carter, once a rookie uncertain of her place, had become a soldier, a leader, and a hero recognized not only by her superiors, but by the very people whose lives she had saved. The ambush in the valley had been her crucible, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and fully capable of facing whatever the future held. As the sun rose over the base the following morning, Emily looked toward the mountains she had survived, feeling a sense of calm and determination. She knew that more challenges awaited, more ambushes, more decisions under pressure. Yet she was no longer afraid. She had learned, acted, and proven herself. She was ready. And the soldiers around her, once doubtful, now looked to her not just as a comrade, but as a guide, a protector, and a hero who had faced the valley's fire and turned it into survival. The rookie was gone. In her place stood Emily Carter, a soldier forged in fire, respected by her peers, and prepared for whatever battles lay ahead. Her journey had reached a pivotal milestone, but she knew that true courage would continue to be tested, and that she would rise again, prepared, focused, and unflinching. And as the base came alive with the hum of morning drills, Emily felt a quiet pride, knowing that she had earned her place, not by desire, but by action, resilience, and unwavering courage.